Welcome to a Practice Pro CPD, brought to you by Law Pro.
I'm Joan Rataic-Lang, the Executive Director of the Toronto Lawyers Association, and I'm very happy to welcome everyone to Protecting Your Firm Against Fraud. I'd like to acknowledge that Toronto is in the dish with one spoon territory. The dish with one spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples from all continents have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Since we're not all gathered in the same place, this land acknowledgement may not be for your traditional territory. If so, we invite you to take some time to learn about and acknowledge the traditional territory that you are on. The Toronto Lawyers Association is very proud of its partnership with Law Pro. We are happy to make available great speakers on important topics to lawyers across the province. Today's program has over 2,000 people registered, and that tells us that Law Pro has their finger on the issues. They know what you guys need to hear. They bring in great speakers, and we provide the background to help it run. Now, separate and apart from Law Pro, TLA offers a number of education programs, some for a fee and others for free. Anyone can become a friend of the TLA to receive our weekly update, and there's no charge for becoming a friend. And you will also then hear about our upcoming education programs. I do want to highlight on May the 9th, we have a free program entitled Escaping the Prison of Belligerence, Mental Wellness. Every day, that will be on April the 21st. Every year, the TLA has a free mental health program. We believe in this, in educating on this very important issue. Now, today you'll be able to, or not today, in a day or two, you'll be able to view this program again on Law Pro's website. There is a lot of content in an hour and a half, so you may want to rewatch part of it. You may also want to tell your friends about it. And also, to continue this, of course, on May the 25th, we will be doing another joint program, Insurance 101 for Lawyers, Tips for Insuring Your Practice. Now, before we get into the actual program, just a few housekeeping tips. If you have a question, type it into the Q&A box. So if you can't see a Q&A box, take your mouse and then scroll along the bottom of your screen and you'll see a bunch of things pop up. Type into the Q&A box, and that makes it easier for our moderator and speakers to stay on top of the questions. Occasionally, things may be shared in the chat. Right now, there is a link for some materials from Law Pro that will be refreshed in a while, but please don't put your questions in there. It becomes a little complicated to monitor both for questions. And finally, don't raise your hand. With 1,000 people online, we can't start unmuting people. You can imagine the chaos that would ensue if we did that. So the safest way to get your questions answered is to type them into the Q&A. Also, there's a lot of material to cover, so you may have to wait till the end for them. If the answers can be incorporated into the speaker's presentation, they may do that, or you may be jumping the gun with a question and asking something that they'll get to. So I'm going to stop talking now. I'm going to mute myself, turn off my video, and I will turn it over to our moderator, Sean Eckert.
Thank you so much, Joan, and thank you to everyone else at the TLA, Sandra and Deirdre, for helping to organize this program. I'm very pleased to be here today. We have so many people signed up to talk about an important and relevant and contemporary topic, that is fraud and the types of fraud that we're seeing against lawyers. Now, my name is Sean Erker. I'm the legal writer and content manager at Law Pro in the Claims Prevention Department. And this is going to be a follow-up somewhat to last year's event, which was titled Survival Tips to Prevent Fraud. Now, like all of Law Pro's previous programs, you can find that on the Practice Pro website at practicepro.ca/CPD. But this is going to be kind of an annual update. This is the 2023, what we're seeing now with respect to fraud. And I am very excited to say that I'm joined today by some excellent speakers. Adkin Holder, who is the Major Fraud Intake Officer in the Financial Crimes Unit of the Toronto Police Service. He's going to give us the law enforcement perspective on these kinds of frauds. Nadia Delamonte, who is manager with Title Plus Claims and Law Pro Counsel. Ray Leclerc, Vice President, Public Affairs with Law Pro. He has spoken at many of these programs, and I'm sure if you've seen them before, you may recognize him. And Ellie Persicili, Claims Counsel with Law Pro. Now, all of these speakers have been on the front lines of fraud. Our Law Pro speakers are the people who are taking these fraud claims and dealing with them every single year. And so they know exactly what lawyers need to do and some tips to try to avoid these frauds. Now, we're going to be separating this program into 3 subtopics. First, we're going to talk about current fraud trends, the kind of things that we're seeing at LawPro. Now, this part of the program provides an update, and we're going to be giving examples of the attacks that we've been seeing against lawyers, some scams, and some saves, some nearly bad stories sometimes. And we're going to be touching on the cyber risks that a lot of lawyers are seeing. This is going to be presented by Nadia and Ellie. And then we're going to look at, secondly, we're going to look specifically at the imposter or identity fraud that we've been seeing in Toronto. Now, this is something that's been in the news a lot as of late. There have been a lot of stories in the Star about homeowners who have perhaps almost lost their title or have lost their title because of imposters pretending to be homeowners. But identity fraud goes beyond that. It can go to private mortgage fund and other circumstances. And then building upon that, we're also going to dive specifically into ID verification, and we're going to have some advice about what to do to confirm that the ID that you're looking at, whether it is government ID or documentation, is accurate, is not fraudulent, has not been forged, and is actually telling you that the person that you are dealing with, whether it's your client or someone else, is who they claim to be. Now, we have resources for this program. If you go into the chat box and scroll up to the very top, you'll see a link to those resources. It is a PDF with everything that kind of is relevant from LawPro that speaks to what we are touching on today. You can also find it at practicepro/CPD and practicepro.ca, /CPD, and going to this program's page, so that is protecting your firm against fraud, and clicking on the download the program materials link. That is about it for the introduction. So I am going to pass this off to Nadia, who is going to start us off with our 2023 fraud update, talking about what LawPro has been seeing recently.
Thanks so much, Sean. And good morning, everyone. We know there are many types of fraud risks that can impact a lawyer's practice and cause financial losses to a law firm or firm clients. During my 15 years working on professional liability and Title Plus claims, I've seen the types of fraud risks impacting the legal profession evolve as fraudsters develop new and more sophisticated techniques to deceive lawyers and their staff for their own financial benefit. Through police investigation, we know that organized crime networks are generally behind real estate-related frauds in Ontario. These syndicates are using highly sophisticated techniques and tools to choose their victims and commit their crimes. These frauds are expected to become more prevalent and cause high financial losses to many victims into the future. I'm going to provide an overview of 3 of the more prevalent types of frauds that the claims team has been seeing recently to help you identify contexts in which we consider the risk of frauds to be higher. The first significant risk of fraud to be conscientious about is the cybercrime involving phishing attacks. They are becoming very, very common. They are committed by cyber criminals through the delivery of fraudulent communications, usually by email to law firm staff that appear to come from a reputable source such as a client and request that the firm direct the payment of funds in connection with an otherwise very legitimate transaction to a third-party bank account by way of wire transfer. For example, a lawyer may be retained to act on the sale of a property. The lawyer or the law clerk and the client regularly communicate through email correspondence. The fraudster has managed to gain online access to the email communications of the lawyer, the law clerk, or the client and watches the back and forth communications. At some point during the course of the transaction, when the client is to provide direction regarding disbursement of the proceeds of sale, the fraudster steps in to pose as the client to provide wire transfer directions to the lawyer or the law clerk. After the fraud is discovered, it is usually determined that the cyber criminals were able to identify the nature and the timing of funds transfer by way of accessing the email account of the law firm, staff, or of an external party, such as the client, connected to the transaction. The source of the fraud may be easily determined by the law firm's internal IT staff, but sometimes a more in-depth forensic analysis by specialized IT firm is required in order to determine the source of the intrusion and how to close off any vulnerabilities that may exist in the law firm system. Often this starts with changing passwords immediately and instituting two-factor authentication for login users of the system, which means adding a second layer of authentication, such as text messaging with a unique code that is required during the login process. Of immediate concern upon discovering this type of fraud is communicating with the bank through which the funds were transferred and the institution that received the wire transfer. The earlier these institutions are notified about the fraud, the more likely they will be able to freeze the funds. Time is therefore considered to be of the essence in these circumstances. If the funds can be frozen, they may be capable of being returned, although sometimes a court order is required. In terms of reporting to LawPro, lawyers often report these types of fraud circumstances when they occur because they are concerned about a potential claim by the client with respect to dispersing funds to an unapproved account. And Ellie is going to elaborate on this in much more detail later in the presentation. Turning now to the second type of major fraud risk faced by lawyers, imposter fraud, which involves an individual using false identification to pose as the owner of a property in order to mortgage or sell the property. Statistically speaking, we have seen that mortgage fraud tends to involve private mortgages rather than institutional letters. The fraudster absconds with a mortgage or sale proceeds. And in the case of a mortgage fraud, the innocent homeowner is left with unencumbered title in terms of the mortgage being registered against the property. In the case of a property sale, the innocent homeowner is left with no title at all. Because discovery of such types of frauds tends to give rise to scrutiny of the lawyers involved in the transactions, we do see that lawyers for the borrower and lender report these types of frauds when they are discovered as circumstances of a potential claim. And often because these types of frauds are perpetrated as a series of multiple frauds against the same property or the same homeowner, we often receive claim reports from from the same lawyer in respect of multiple matters in respect of these matters. Of immediate concern upon discovery of these types of frauds is communicating with the Office of the Director of Titles in order to have title to the property frozen to prevent any further fraudulent registrations. This notification also generally prompts the Office of the Director of Titles to initiate what is known as a caution hearing in order to determine whether the mortgage or transfer at issue is a fraudulent instrument under the Land Titles Act. Caution hearings are usually presided over by a Deputy Director of Titles. All parties to the transaction provide evidence. If the mortgage or transfer at issue is determined to be a fraudulent instrument, it may be deleted from title. The alternative to this process is for the parties to commence litigation to determine the validity of the mortgage or transfer. In my experience, in cases of clear imposter fraud, the caution hearing process is a much more faster and cost-efficient means of obtaining this determination. Turning now to sort of the the impact that title insurance has on these types of frauds. If title insurance was obtained for the mortgage or purchase transaction, the title insurer will be generally engaged to investigate and respond to imposter frauds. Although the terms and conditions of the policy of insurance in each case should be carefully reviewed upon purchase to confirm that this coverage is available. In the case of mortgage fraud, title insurance policies do generally include lender coverage for the risk that the mortgage is invalid due to imposter fraud. However, just note related to this, during the last few years, I'll note that the title insurers have sometimes placed limitations on this type of coverage by way of inserting an exception into standard title insurance policies, effectively removing this coverage. It's therefore critical that the lawyer review this type of the terms and conditions of the policy in order to confirm that this coverage is available. If this coverage has been backed out of the policy, it's important to let the lender client know about this and provide them with an opportunity to determine whether to continue with a transaction or not. And related to this point, title insurers have also sometimes placed preconditions with respect to this type of coverage. For example, the title insurer may require that an undertaking be obtained from the lawyer for the borrower with respect to the disbursement of loan proceeds to the registered title owner or another approved recipient. It's important to pay close attention to these requirements. And if you are the lawyer that is providing the undertaking, it's important to ensure that you are strictly following the wording of the undertaking, as we have experienced that fraudsters will try to convince their lawyer to pay mortgage proceeds to what may be considered an unapproved recipient pursuant to the wording of the undertaking. And it's simply not worth taking the chance of being offside of the undertaking that you have given. In cases where there is a fraud coverage for lender, and it's a straightforward situation of coverages available, and the mortgage is determined to have been granted by an imposter, the title insurer will generally pay the lender the loss resulting from the imposter fraud, which may typically be the advance under the loan plus interest. The innocent homeowner in these cases may also obtain the benefit of title insurance if they had purchased the policy of title insurance at the time of purchasing the property or any time thereafter and prior to the fraud being perpetrated. This is because title insurance policies generally include homeowner coverage for the risk of post-closing fraud. If the homeowner has this coverage, the insurer will generally investigate this matter, and if the mortgage is determined to have been granted by an imposter, the insurer will assist the homeowner in the process of having the fraudulent mortgage deleted or discharged from title. This can include the initial notification to the Office of the Director of Titles about the fraud, providing support to the homeowner through the caution hearing process, alternatively commencing litigation to have the mortgage declared fraudulent and discharged from title. Sometimes the lender will have commenced the mortgage enforcement proceedings before the fraud is discovered, and the title insurer will become involved in responding to defend the homeowner. Similarly, in the case where a property is sold by an imposter, if the true owner of the property has a title insurance policy including this coverage, the insurer will generally become involved to investigate to seek reinstatement of the property into the true owner's name. Generally, this is a successful strategy. If for some reason this cannot be achieved, the title insurer will consider paying the owner and their mortgage lender the value of the property that they have lost. And the same is true for the innocent purchaser that is involved in purchasing the property. If they had obtained title insurance in connection with the purchaser, which would be typical these days, and they are not entitled to keep the property due to imposter fraud invalidating the title, the insurer would review paying the value the purchaser and potentially any mortgage lender put into the property as the actual loss under the policy. Turning now to the newest type of potential fraud scenario that we are seeing, contractor scams, which involves vulnerable homeowners, usually elderly individuals, who are deceived by door-to-door sales people as to register liens against their property and obtain mortgages to pay out those liens. So, for example, a homeowner may be persuaded to rent various equipment such as a water softener or a furnace that they may not actually need or even work. The scammers register liens against title to the property, securing usually exorbitant payout amounts. The homeowner is then approached with an offer to consolidate this debt and complete renovations to the property by way of private mortgage financing. The interest rates on these private mortgages are generally extremely high. Ultimately, the fraudsters abscond with the funds, and no legitimate work is completed to the property. Homeowners usually only realize the extent of this fraud when they are the subject of a mortgage enforcement proceeding and at risk of losing their home. In terms of the roles that a lawyer plays in these situations is just generally that they are to provide independent legal advice to the property owner and to register the mortgage against title. Discovery of such frauds tends to give rise to scrutiny of lawyers involved in the transaction and in terms of alleged failure to provide inadequate independent legal advice. And while ILA claims against lawyers are not new, these matters do tend to stand out because they involve a series of high-risk mortgages granted by vulnerable clients on a fixed income with respect to the consolidation of seemingly illegitimate renovation debt. Another factor that seems to stand out in these matters is that the source of the referrals for this work is from a particular lawyer or mortgage broker to a lender. So from a risk management perspective, we do consider that there is a heightened risk associated with acting on these transactions. As a result, if there is a willingness to accept this type of retainer, a heightened level of due diligence by way of additional questions to the client and discussions regarding the client's options is recommended. And as always is the case, properly documenting your file is important. I'm going to turn it over now to Ali to talk in more detail about wire frauds.
Good morning. Thank you, Nadia. Wire frauds have been an increasing concern for us at LawPro, given the level of sophistication we are seeing in the claims coming through. Gone are the days when you would receive emails written with poor grammar, irregular salutations, or obvious red flags. Threat actors are infiltrating email accounts and computer systems, primarily through phishing attacks. This is where you receive an email, text message, or phone call from what appears to be a legitimate source, but in actuality is an imposter seeking to steal your user details, such as login passwords. One recent example of a phishing attempt was experienced by a lawyer who received what appeared to be a legitimate email from her former IT company 1 week after she canceled her contract. She was advised that they required access to her system to conclude the cancellation. There was nothing about the interaction that raised any suspicions for the lawyer. At their request, she allowed them entry through Teams Viewer, which gave them access to her system and her online banking account. Luckily, the lawyer became suspicious and closed her laptop, which ended the session. This is an example of an attempt that was timed just right, where the threat actor knew key information, made requests for access, all in a manner that was seemingly legitimate. Other ways a threat actor may gain access is through malware downloaded on your computer system. This can be installed either through clicking on links in an email or browser, through previously compromised or reused passwords, or simply using common passwords. Once they are into your system, they monitor emails and gain access to information about upcoming transactions. This allows them to know when money transfers are to take place. They spoof emails, engage in convincing email exchanges, which mimic prior communications, with the same writing style, signature lines, company logos, and even copyright notices. Through those emails, they provide fraudulent direction for the distribution of funds. These can either be initial directions or redirections. These spoofed email addresses are often off by a letter, or they contain a sequence of letters, such as an R and an N, placed next to each other, which at first glance looks like an M, but is not. So if there is reason to be suspicious, take a look at the email address a bit closer. While the number of wire fraud claims we've received at LawPro are not overly significant, wire frauds, when they do happen, have the potential to cause significant uninsured exposure to lawyers. The LawPro policy excludes claims that fall within the definition of cybercrime, within which wire frauds may fall. However, to provide lawyers with some level of protection, LawPro provides all insureds with a cybercrime endorsement, which has a sublimit of $250,000 for third-party claims which arise from an error, omission, or negligent act. If there are multiple wire transfers, it is also important to understand that transfers arising from the same cyber breach could be deemed related, as defined in the policy. Therefore, one limit could be available for all losses. Because of this, you can imagine how easy it could be for those limits to be exhausted. For example, we had one claim where there were 5 separate wire transfers totaling $600,000, for which only $250,000 was available. We have seen losses as low as $80,000 up to millions of dollars. Unfortunately, for some of the cybercrime claims we receive, the sublimit is not enough. It is also important to note that the LawPro policy only provides coverage for third-party claims. First-party losses incurred by the lawyer or the firm, such as the cost of obtaining breach consulting services, retaining a cyber expert, privacy lawyer, among other expenses, are not covered under the policy. The LawPro policy also excludes claims and potential claims arising from ransomware attacks. This is where malicious software is downloaded onto your system, which blocks access to the system until a sum of money is paid. This is why it is important to consider the availability and appropriateness of purchasing dedicated policies of insurance, which may provide coverage for losses associated with cyber attacks, such as wire frauds and ransomware. While these dedicated policies may provide some protection, prevention is key. Our goal this morning is to provide tips on how to prevent wire fraud and what to do should they occur. We are here to share what we've learned through what we have seen. Not every situation will be the same. Not every situation can be avoided, but hopefully some of what we share this morning will prevent a claim. Speaking of preventing a claim, I would also like to remind you to consult our Avoid a Claim website, where you will find a dedicated section on fraud prevention. With that being said, here are some things to consider from a preventative standpoint. First and foremost, and which is repeated many times by us at LawPro, call before you click. COVID has certainly made us highly reliant on email. However, lawyers are required to independently verify the legitimacy of directions. Therefore, calling is essential. This independent verification does not apply only to redirections. We are talking about any directions, from your clients, from financial institutions, from lawyers on the other side of a transaction, because they may not be who you think they are, even from those inside your firm. In one case, the firm sent multiple separate wire transfers, well above policy limits, all due to its staff member's email being compromised. The threat actor sent an instructing email purporting to be a clerk to the firm's accounting department, and the monies were released pursuant to those instructions. The accounting department did not independently verify instructions received from internal staff. They did not call before they clicked. This is an example of why it is important to consider implementing protocols, which include the verification of not only external instructions, but also internal instructions. Another tip, when contacting someone outside of your firm, consider what contact information you have available. Where did that contact information come from? Was it in a signature line to an email, or was it a verified number you have used before? Threat actors are modifying signature lines in emails, replacing legitimate numbers with alternate numbers. In one situation, while the insured did call to verify instructions, she used the number in the sender's signature line. While no one answered, the voicemail greeting seemed authentic, and therefore she was convinced that the instructions were legitimate. Unfortunately, they were not, as the number was modified. Also, review the instructions received. Do they make sense? For example, does it make sense that your client, who is not a corporation, is asking for you to send monies to a numbered company? Does it make sense that your client is asking for monies to be sent to an overseas bank account? In one case, the insured was instructed to wire funds of an individual client to a bank account in the name of a taxi company located in Dubai. While our insured did question whether the payment details were correct, he was assured by his client via email that they were. Therefore, he sent the money, not knowing that that was a convincing threat actor. Go with your gut. If it doesn't make sense, a phone call might be needed. Does it make sense that your client is asking for the funds to be sent in a different currency? In another case, instructions were received to wire funds in US dollars to a US bank account purportedly held by the recipient law firm. However, the law firm on the other side of the transaction was a Canadian law firm with no connection to the US. This is also an example of a very sophisticated attempt, as the bank account was in fact opened in the name of the firm by the threat actors, therefore seemingly legitimate. It is still to be determined how the bank was even allowed to open such an account in the first place. So if monies are being sent to a non-Canadian bank account or in a different currency, ask more questions and pick up the phone. In another claim, the monies were being sent to a bank to pay out a line of credit. The firm received emails from what appeared to be the same bank representative they had previously corresponded with. These prior emails were legitimate. However, once the threat actor was aware of the upcoming payment, because they had been monitoring emails, they began to redirect emails relating to this transaction. Then they sent their own emails using a spoofed email address. The insured received payment directions on bank letterhead. The email and the direction itself all look legitimate. However, and without knowing, the monies were directed to a numbered company held by someone other than the bank. Again, be vigilant and call before you click. Multi-factor authentication is another preventative measure. Where this is set up, the user first enters their username and password. Then, instead of immediately gaining access, the user is required to provide another piece of information, such as a code, which is sent either via email, text message, or preferably through an app on another device. Many firms do already have this set up for their system. However, for a majority of the claims we have seen, the firm did not have multi-factor authentication. This is something that if you do not yet have, you may wish to consider implementing. I must also note that even multi-factor authentication is capable of being circumvented by threat actors. Therefore, without implementing the other protections I have discussed, there is still a way for threat actors to gain access. For example, the threat actor will send an email that looks legitimate, i.e. a phishing attempt, and asks the recipient to click on a link. Once clicked, they are directed to what appears to be the real website. They then enter the code sent to their cell phone. Unknowing to them, the website has been mimicked. The website address has been spoofed. That website goes through the threat actor server. If the code is stolen, then the threat actor becomes the individual, and they no longer need the password or the multi-factor authentication. So again, be careful before you click. Once the transfer has been sent, and as soon as you have come to learn of the fraud, it is important that you do a few things. One, first and foremost, call your bank immediately and initiate a recall request. If the monies cannot be recalled, there is still the prospect of having the account frozen before the threat actor has a chance to withdraw all the money. We've had some recent success with banks being able to recover monies from the recipient account. The key is to contact your bank as soon as possible. While you might not always be able to move as quickly as one would like, as you might not learn of the fraud until days after, recovery may still be possible. We've had luck even when some time has passed. For example, one fraud was not discovered until 10 days after the money was transferred. Although that length of time was a concern, the bank was still able to recover 75% of the monies. In some cases, the financial institution has already flagged that transfer as suspicious, and they may be holding the funds pending the completion of their investigation. In some cases, these monies get returned to your account without court order. In other cases, a court order is needed. Unfortunately, for the most part, the money is withdrawn quickly. But as there are times when money can still be recovered, don't let the late notice stop you from contacting your bank as soon as you become aware. Call your IT company. If someone infiltrated your system, they may still be there. You need passwords to be changed, system resets, and other safeguards to be put in place to ensure that the threat actors are not still accessing information. Consider retaining a cyber expert. They can conduct a forensic audit of your system. They can determine the extent of the breach, if there are any ongoing threats to your system, and can recommend better safeguards to avoid future breaches. They can complete a much more detailed and deeper dive into your system than a typical IT technician can. Report the incident to police. Call LawPro. Not only could this loss result in a claim against you, but we can also provide you with some guidance as to what to do next. Advise your client. Pursuant to your obligations under Rule 7.8-1 of the Rules of Professional Conduct. Consider filing a claim with your other insurers. This could be your professional liability excess insurer, cyber insurer, commercial general liability insurer, among others. On this point, it is important that you obtain complete copies of all your insurance policies, including the declaration pages and copies of endorsements so that you can analyze the potential coverage available to you. Your insurance broker might be able to assist you as well. With all of this being said, consider what you can do to protect your email and your computer system. Consider retaining a cyber expert before a breach occurs to analyze your system, look for weaknesses, and recommend protections. Be careful clicking on unverified links. Be sure that the person asking you for sensitive information is who they say they are. Review your instructions. Look for what doesn't make sense, and always call the person who provided the instructions at a reliable and verified phone number. Even if it is too late and you forgot to call before you clicked, although after today, we hope you don't forget that, call the recipient to verify receipt of funds. This way, if all else fails and the money did not get to where you intended it to go, you can take immediate steps to try to recall the money or have the recipient account frozen. We hope you share this information with your staff, have regular discussions about cybersecurity, and consider putting in place some of the protocols we have discussed this morning, as prevention is the #1 way to deal with cyber threats. Thank you, and I will pass it back to Sean.
Thank you so much, Ellie, and thank you, Nadia, as well, for speaking to these issues. So I just want to remind everyone who is viewing the program today or in the future that we have a lot of materials in the program materials that touch on specifically what was covered during this first session especially. I want to draw attention to the fact that we have new fraud fact sheets on Fraud Watch, which teach tips and advice for dealing with things like phishing attacks, wire frauds, just like Ellie was speaking to, bad check frauds, and frauds that come from inside the organizations. And it contains a lot of summaries and helpful information to that. And those are in the materials, and they're also available on the practicepro.ca website. In addition, I want to point out to everyone that when we're talking about things like two-factor authorization or authentication, that is something that has a lot of different variations to it in terms of the technology that you're using. You can be using a cell phone to get an SMS reminder that gives you a second factor to log into your account. It can also be an application that you download onto your phone, and your phone then will give you a code that you use to update and get into your account. Thirdly, it could also be an independent dongle, so to speak, is the word often used on that constantly recycles the information and gives you a new code every 60 seconds and is tied to your account. Now, those different variations have different levels of security. So an SMS type two-factor authorization or authentication is susceptible to hacking sometimes. People can get around that. They can redirect those SMSs to another phone number, which can allow them to log in despite the fact that you have 2FA. Having an independent dongle or an app on your phone is slightly more secure in that regard. But it's important to remember that some security is better than no security. And so even using a SMS type 2FA is better than no 2FA at all. And you can find out more information on the kind of technology that is available for lawyers, including for security like that. In the resources, there is a link to our online guide for technology for lawyers. Another practicepro.ca resource can be found on the links page, which I believe is page 25 of the resources. One more thing that I want to speak to, though, is that although we talk a lot about real estate throughout all of these recent attempts, because the private lender mortgage and the identity fraud in the news is happening with regards to homes that are being resold, all of these tips apply to any lawyer, because any lawyer that ever has to wire funds can be susceptible to wire fund fraud, and any lawyer that uses a computer, which is all lawyers, can be susceptible to cybercrime, hacking, ransomware, all of those types of things. And so the specific tips that we're talking about today are going to be particularly useful in all of those circumstances. In fact, when we are talking about lawyers that wire funds, it can be for a real estate transaction, for example, where we're talking about you get instructions to redirect your funds somewhere else. But it can also, there is also a certain amount of wire fraud that comes from the other direction, where you get money coming into your account, and that money is actually like a bad check. It is money that you think is legitimate from a real source. Perhaps it's from a client, perhaps it's from another party, but in actuality, there's no good money on the other side to that. And I want to actually just briefly put this to Ray to speak to what you can do as lawyers to confirm the authenticity of wire funds, whether it's wire funds coming in or going out. Ray, I'm just going to throw to you now.
Thank you, Sean. So we have to understand that in our banking system, it works on trust. The banks are very quick at putting $1 in the account, but there's no information as to how that dollar or what system was used. You have to understand that basically our banking system, as I say, works on trust. So they'll instantly put credit. They put a credit into your account, not the actual dollars. How do you tell the difference? Well, we have two systems in Canada to transfer money. ACSS, which is 99% of all transactions are through ACSS, and they can be recalled by the bank. They can pull the money back out if the credit is not validated eventually. The safe system is the link system. Used to be LVTS, it is now links, and it is irrevocable, but that's only 1% of the transactions. How can you tell the difference? Very problematic, because there's no information that's provided to you. One of the things that is available is links will create what they call a PCRN, a payment confirmation reference number. And so when you are sending from your desktop a links transaction, links wire, when you go after you've submitted it, the links will create this PCRN. It will be in your receipt. You do have to sometimes go down into your details to see the receipt, but it will be there. How do you identify it? It's basically a code that starts with LVTS and then 9 digits. So if you see LVTS and 9 digits, then you have legitimate funds. They're irrevocable and they're gone, and they will be received by the recipient. So when you send the receipt to the other side, you should be sending the receipt showing the LVTS. So the lawyer receiving the money now can verify that this is a link system, irrevocable money. Lawyers who are receiving the money should be contacting their banks and asking the bank to tell them what the PCRN that they got. Banks are obligated under Section 39 of the Bylaw 9 of Payments Canada, which deals with links transactions. They're obligated to tell you if you ask for the PCRN. And so if you get the PCRN from the other side in their receipt, you get the PCRN from the bank, then in that case, you know that you're in a link system, you know that you have an actual dollar, not a credit, and it cannot be pulled back. And that's what you should be looking for. We'll talk a bit more about it later. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks so much, Ray. So now I want to get into the second section of this program, where we're going to dive deeper into the imposter fraud situation that is going on right now. And we're also going to be talking about ID verification and some tips in that regard. Now, I want to first start going back to Ray, actually, to talk about what LawPro's perspective is on the actual facts on the ground that we're seeing with respect to the imposter fraud, what we see on the claims perspective when it comes in with respect to lawyers. And then after that, I was hoping to go to Detective Holder and get the law enforcement's perspective on these same kinds of frauds, just so that we can see exactly how the different pieces are fitting together with all of these kinds of organized attempts to pretend to be someone else and defraud lawyers using fake IDs. Ray, I'll just throw it back to you now.
Thank you. And your last statement was a very accurate, organized attempt. What we are seeing is these fraudsters are not alone in this. It is a team sport. And that's why I say that preventing fraud is a team sport also. Everybody in the office has to have their eyes on it and be able to be vigilant and be mindful of it. We are seeing they're very sophisticated in their documentation. They will have all kinds of ID that will look very, very real, and the detective will talk a bit more about what to look for. But basically, the ID is very deceiving, but also the other documentation that comes with it. We have seen, and if you go on avoidaclaim.com and look at the types of frauds we have examples of the information that has been provided. The documentation provided in various scams is very, very real looking. Somebody actually knows what they're doing. They understand the transaction. They understand the documents. They've mimicked the documents. And today it is very easy to reproduce a document, certificates, all kinds of documents that can be available that are there. And we have all kinds of ID, driver's license, passports, all kinds of verification documents that are there. And so it is something that you need to be looking at. The other thing is that they're typically not acting alone, as I say. And so in one case, police had reported to us that they arrested somebody that had multiple cell phones on them. And on the back of the cell phone was the phone number and the character that they were. So they were the borrower, they were the appraiser, they were the bank official, et cetera. And so they knew when they answered the phone as to what role they should be playing. You were always talking to the same person, but probably did not. I don't know if they change their voice, but that's the extent of sophistication. The other thing we see is on the phishing side is that there are different. It's almost like a production line. You'll have some people who are good at the intrusion. They get into the system, and once they get into the system, pass that on to somebody else, and that person's role is just to listen in, to see the conversation. Are there any payments? Anything going to happen? And what I mean, if there is, then it's passed on to the third group that basically their expertise is in sending these fake messages, fraudulent messages, to redirect the funds or to get you to get further information. And so it's a fully organized system. It's not just somebody, in their pajamas in their basement, although that may be possible, but that's what we saw before. It is much more sophisticated, and in fact, now we see that they're state actors. It is not just a criminal. Well, they're all criminals, but basically, we have now state sanctioned situations where that is happening, and that all has to be taken into account. You want to look also at the type of property will elevate the risk that's involved. Homeowner who lives in the home, they're selling their home, they're mortgaging their home is one issue. But when you have properties that are rentals, when you have properties that have that are on Airbnb or Verbo or whatever, the opportunity of somebody to be able to go in, because they use that opportunity to get the appraisers in, to get people to the agents in, to get people to view the property. They use those opportunities that they have that 1 week that they're into the property for exactly setting up the scam. One of the things I want to dispel, though, is somebody keeps saying, well, if your property is mortgaged, you're safe. No, not at all. Although, it is much easier when there is no mortgage or very little mortgage to do so. But typically, there's no reason why. And in fact, we've seen this on when we do refinancing frauds. they will refinance the property 2 and 3 times. They'll put a mortgage on, they'll discharge it illegally, obviously, put a second mortgage on, discharge that, and do a third time and run away with the money. And then all of a sudden, all of the, now 4 mortgages are now coming knocking at the door of the legitimate owner saying you haven't paid your mortgage. So having a mortgage is no absolute provision. If you think of it like the cars along the street. If somebody's looking to do some damage, they're walking down the street, they'll try the door handle. If it opens, that's easy. If it doesn't open, they move on to the next one. Typically, they're looking for the easiest target to get. But if they really wanted to get into that car, even if the doors are locked, they will. And so don't be mistaken by the situations, but you want to make sure that you understand truly who the client is, who the property is, and the elevated risk that you may have. With that, I think I'll pass it on to Detective and to entertain us.
Yeah, just to add there, what you said, so I would say 10 years ago for mortgage fraud investigations, everyone would say to add a line of credit onto your house if you had your mortgage free and clear. So, but 10 years ago, if you had a house that was worth $500,000 and you put a $250,000 line of credit on your property, that may protect you because the fraudsters wouldn't get that much out of your home. But now that same $500,000 home is now worth 1.5 million. So now the fraudsters will do that mortgage fraud, pay that $250 line of credit that's off in your house, and still walk away with a large portion of the mortgage fraud's monies. So that doesn't protect you anymore. And I try to convey that to everybody. That's not protection, a line of credit.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Detective. So just building on what Ray said, one of the things that we can do with respect to clients that come in the door is make sure that we ask a lot of questions, make sure that we ask them why they are coming to see us, why they are coming to see that particular lawyer who referred them, what their purpose is of the transaction, and if this is a real estate transaction, for example, to ask them about title insurance. If they don't want title insurance, why don't they want title insurance? They might have a legitimate reason, but all of these questions can help give you a better sense of what kind of red flags might be twinging the possibility that there's something off about the transaction. And if you do see any red flags, there are any concerns, as the speakers have already said today, please keep in mind that it's always a good idea to call Law Pro. We have our fraud team, Ray's on the fraud team. Lots of great Law Pro counsel are on the fraud team who can give you some advice specifically with respect to those matters. So now I want to get a bit deeper into the ID element of this, because that goes hand in hand with the ID fraud, with the imposter situation that is going on, because when people come into a lawyer's office, if they're trying to further a fraudulent transaction, they often have fraudulent documentation, they have a fake ID. And so I want to put this specifically to Detective Holder about what advice you have for lawyers about spotting fake IDs and what steps they should take to ensure that they are confirming their client is who they say they are and who they claim to be.
Yeah, it's very tough with the identifications and technology these days that they're very hard to detect now. That the quality of the fake identification is very good. I was just on a conference speaking about that with the RCMP in Ottawa, and they were talking about the quality of the stuff that they seize now. So, I mean, the first one that I think, like we talk about the fake identification that we see here in Toronto, and it's part of the GTA. The top one would be the Ontario driver's license, would be the forgery, and then next would be permanent resident card, and then third, the Ontario photo card. Fourth would be the Canadian citizenship card. Fifth, birth certificate, and then the social insurance card. But some tips that I have for lawyers when they're looking at the Ontario driver's license and those things that they would come in and produce. Some of the tips I look at is like when we're looking at the Ontario driver's license, I always like to look at the height of the person. So that's one thing. I'll look at the height of the person. I'll look at the centimeters. So I know I'm 178 centimeters on my driver's license. So I can compare who that person, how tall that person should be to me. So I'll look and I'll see if that person says 172. I'll say, okay, that person should be a little bit shorter than me when they come in to see me. Or if I look at if it's someone's in 163, I know that's about 5'3" or so. I should be expecting that height. So those are the things that I kind of look for. And then I would look at another tips are if they're producing a Canadian citizenship card and a driver's license, Ontario driver's license. The pictures should not match. The pictures, so if they have a citizenship card or a passport, that's Service Canada. Any Ontario driver's license or health card, that's Service Ontario. So those are two different photos that are taken for those different pieces of identification. So those pictures should not match. So if I get a Canadian citizenship card and an Ontario driver's license, I will look at the issue date on both of them. So one of the cases that I had, the issue date for the Canadian citizenship card was in 2005, and the Ontario driver's license was in 2018, but the pictures matched. So I know there that can't be, right? So I know those two pictures cannot match, taken 13 years apart. So they cannot match. So that's when those are the tips that I have for a Canadian citizenship card and a DL. And then we'll look at the Canadian citizenship card. Those cards haven't been issued since February of 2012. So anybody that has that and came into your office, you're looking at ID that's at least 10 years old and it's not issued any longer. So I wouldn't accept it personally as identification. Like another lawyer told me, if someone came with that sort of identification, they just told them, you know what, go back to the Service Ontario and get yourself an Ontario photo card and then come back to my office, because I think that ID is defunct now. But so if you get anyone coming to the Canadian citizenship card showing an issue date after 2012 February, that's a high red flag to show that it's a forgery. And then same thing, like I've had other occasions where they show a Canadian citizenship card and then they show a Canadian passport. So then my first thought is, okay, where is that person from? When I look at the passport, it says their place of birth was Toronto. So then I think, well, why would you have a Canadian citizenship card and you have a passport, but you're born in Toronto? You should have a birth certificate. But then I thought that when I spoke to Passport Canada, I found out that some people like to have a Canadian citizenship card. So they do issue those to some people, but I would say the majority of people, 99% of people, don't have a Canadian passport, somebody born in Canada, and a Canadian citizenship card. And some of the other things I look for are just tips if someone's producing identification is if they don't have a driver's license, I kind of look in to say, well, why wouldn't they have a driver's license? If that's a husband and wife and they both don't have a driver's license, that raises a red flag. Okay, I want to see why. I want to know where they live. If they live out of the city, they live in the country, because a lot of places, someone needs to have a driver's license to get places. So, if they live in downtown Toronto, close to transit, I kind of lower my red flags on that. But most of the time, a lot of percentage of the families, somebody has a driver's license.
One of the other things that we found is that ID theft is not limited to individuals. And so what we have found is ID theft for corporations. And it was fairly easy under the old registry to file a Form 1 to change the directors and officers, and then show up in the lawyer's office with the ID, either their real ID as being the officer and director of that corporation, or fake ID, but also with a minute book. And the minute book typically was completely made up. The lawyer does the corporate profile search and sees that the officers and directors are X. X is sitting in front of them. X has ID, and they have a minute book, and they indicate that they recently purchased the corporation from the individual, and they're looking to mortgage or to sell the property. And so you have to be very careful when you're looking. If it's a recently filed Form 1, you should be looking a little further, asking more questions as to going forward. With the new business registry, it is a little more difficult because there is a company corporate key that does provide a little more security. However, there are a number of Form 1s that were filed before. And also today, anyone can go to the service providers. You used to be able to go to any registry office and file a Form 1 as long as you had the right form filled in and the amount to get it registered. However, now you have to go to a service provider, but the service providers have no standards to which to verify the clientele. Lawyers have that obligation to verify. We'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. But basically, these two service providers have no obligation, no standard to meet. And so if you have the right form and the right money, you can get the Form 1 filed. The government's position is that the registry is a content provider, and but they're not guaranteeing the information. This is not like the Land Titles Act where they're guaranteeing the title. They're simply providing the information that is received. So lawyers have to be attentive. We've seen a number of frauds where individuals have changed the ownership, not the ownership, but have changed the officers, directors, or changed the office of the registered office so that any notice now goes to a new place. And then, of course, they're mortgaging and refiling. So be very careful when you're looking at it. It's not just individuals, but it is corporations also, although typically an individual will show up, and then all of the things that the detective talked about on determining the validity of the ID they're providing to you will be there. One of the things to be that we have been using and have been telling people is to go to the Ontario Ministry website to search for driver's license to see if it's a valid license. That is still a good test to do. Unfortunately, it's very limited in its scope. All it basically tells you if it's valid or not valid, and the fraudsters have now taken to the habit now of actually taking valid licenses and fraudulently changing them. And so you do the search, you get a reply that says it's valid, but in fact it's fraudulent because they changed the picture and the name and whatever information they need to. And so be very careful when you're looking at that. You don't get a picture, you don't get the name of the person who owns the license, you just get that it's valid, but that doesn't mean that it is accurate or good ID. One of the things to look at of the often test that we've done is you look at the last digits of the number of the driver's license is supposed to be the date of birth, and so that should be matching. One of the things I did not know though is the first letter of that number is the first letter of your last name. And again, those are quick things to be looked at. One of the things with ID is that basically it is not a copy and file exercise. And unfortunately, we're seeing where we have had, where LawPro has seen fraud is exactly that situation. Somebody came in, they have an obligation to get ID, they copy it, they put it in the file and don't look at it. And as Detective Holder was saying, look, what is the height of the person? Ask them questions about it. Do they know their address? Do they, all of those things set out. Do they know their postal code? And to see if they've, well memorized. They may be very good actors and the fraudsters, and they may have done their homework and know the information. But again, it's one more test that you can do just to see, and you can do that very casually without anybody suspecting that you're questioning their validity. But it's one of the obligations now that we have. I saw in the chat one of the questions that was put out is saying that the proposals that we're making are impractical. And yes, they're cumbersome. Yes, they're more difficult. Yes, they have to do it, but it is much less so than if you get caught in a fraud. You will spend hours and hours defending yourself, either in a Law Society complaint or a LawPro claim. You may be answering to the police who are going to show up on your door to get information. So yes, it's a little more cumbersome. It's a little more problematic using two-factor authentication or using the other methods. But again, if you don't, you could be spending a lot more time. And so I implore you to look at it. If you want to be the house that has the locked door, not the house that has the unlocked door on the street, because then you're just an open invitation. And so please, consider that. And the question as to what's the level of security we should have. Well, Fort Knox is great, but we don't expect that of everybody. And again, it's just being better than your neighbor almost comes down to, it's just less of a target. And so any security is better security. And so look at something that works in your practice, that makes it, that it's not too cumbersome, but that elevates your game and just makes it a little more difficult for fraudsters. Fraudsters look for the path of least resistance. And if you're asking too many questions, you're putting them through too many things, they'll simply go away to another lawyer who will not do that. And it'll save you a lot of time down the road.
Thanks so much, Ray. I know one of the questions that lots of lawyers have, and it's come up in the chat already a couple times, is that this discussion is particularly relevant for when a client comes into your office and they sit down in front of you and they give you the driver's license. But how do you virtually verify that the person that you're talking to is who they say they are? Now, the rules about this are in flux and obviously are changing. So there isn't a definitive long-term answer on this, but I do want to throw it back to Ray just to speak a little bit about what's going on with virtual verification and what the third parties that are available actually do.
Yes, and so you're correct. Everything's in flux. The whole industry is in flux right now. The Law Society looked at changing the rules. They put that off to next year, and so we'll have to see what changes come about there as to what higher obligation lawyers will have for the virtual and maybe even for the in-person. Who knows where that will go. We have the banks are using Verify Me, which has now been bought by Interact and is now verified by Interact, to basically verify clients when they have questions and not quite sure what they're testing. And part of it is we don't know the systems they're using and we don't know the criteria for which they are using the system. We know that the title insurers are now looking at a third-party application, and many of them have signed up for the same one. Again, we don't know when they will require that, and so that's still in flux. We have the real estate agents and the mortgage brokers who are now being pushed by their regulators to be more vigilant in the situation. We are presently now going down the path of basically every step through the transaction, the client, the public, will have to be put through various ways of confirming their ID, which will be time consuming and costly. So the industry is starting those discussions as to where do we go, how do we accomplish this, can we synchronize all of this, can we share the information? That is coming, but it's not there yet. The best thing we can do is for lawyers to spend more time on ID verification. If we can stop those frauds, then of course the other parties, the title insurers, the banks, and others don't necessarily have to go through it. So it falls to the lawyers really to take this on and to ensure that the client in front of them is truly who they say they are. And taking some of the tips that we put forward today is the way that we can do that. If we don't, then of course you will know that we will be forced, the clients and us will be forced to respond to the title insurers. In fact, the director of titles has indicated that they may be putting their own standard in. So we may have the Law Society, title insurers, the director of titles, the banks putting on different situations. So we need to get together and we need to bring that about. It's going to take some time. It's in flux right now, but it's definitely being looked at seriously and being implemented. And you can be sure that we will have more requirements to do. And so, start protecting yourself, start protecting your clients. And this is a great message for clients, that this is the value that lawyers bring. That basically, yes, we're putting you through this, but that's the reason why is to protect them from fraudulent transactions.
Thanks, Ray. So there's a lot of questions in the Q&A at the moment, which is great. We love to see how much engagement is coming from this audience. I just want to touch on a couple of things that have come up already. One of the questions asked, outside of real estate practice, what are the risks of accepting e-transfers for retainers or settlement funds? And so this goes to what Ray was speaking to earlier with respect to the fact that our financial system sort of operates on trust. And so when you get get a retainer from a client or settlement funds that goes directly into your account, it can be real money if it is an actual wire, but if it's an e-transfer, it's more likely that that is just a credit. It is essentially the same as if you got a check, and that check could bounce. And so the risk, of course, is that you get money into your account, your bank allows you to use that money, you think you have the money, you send the money somewhere else because the client says, oh, actually, I've changed my mind, or the client says, oh, I want you to redirect this money over here. The money leaves your account, and then the bank comes back to you and says, you actually never had that money in the first place, and now there is a deficit in your trust account, or now somehow the bank needs to be made whole because that was not your money to give away. And so that just goes to all of the things that Ray was talking about confirming the authenticity of the money. Make sure you understand how the PCRN numbers work. We have more information about that in the materials and on the LawPro website. There is an article in the materials called Update on Wire Transfer Funds. And there is also a wire transfer fund checklist, which is extremely useful, that'll help you go through and make sure that you are double checking all of the potential fraud points when you are dealing with these transfers of money through the financial system, especially digitally. Another question that came up here has to do with whether or not passports are the best ID to require if someone comes into your office. With respect to the rules, obviously, lawyers are not required to use a specific type of ID. There are various trustworthy IDs that you can use. You do not need to use passports, but I just want to actually direct this question to Detective Holder and whether he can elaborate on whether, to answer that question, whether passports are better than other documents or why that would or would not be so.
I personally think the passport is probably one of the top ones for IDs and security. We don't see fake passports physically come into to an office. So I would see someone using a photocopy or some kind of copy and using it virtually, but actually using the actual passport and seizing that physically, we don't get those ones for mortgage frauds. So the ones that we use that we see that are fake are from a picture of some sort that the lawyer has received. The ones that we see physically are going to be back to the Ontario driver's license and the Canadian citizenship card and permanent residency card. Those are the ones. But to me, I think, yeah, the passport would be a good one, especially the chip ones. I don't think the forgeries are there yet on those.
So there was another question in the chat asking about if there is an easy online resource where you can check whether an ID is authentic. And I know that one of the problems with that is, although you can check a driver's license number, for example, the driver's license number on a fake ID is probably an authentic number. The problem is it probably is authentic for someone else and does not actually apply to the person that you're talking to. Detective Holder, I don't know if there are any particular resources you would recommend online to familiarize yourself with what a fake ID might look like, or how you can double check that what you're looking at is real.
We do the same thing what you do. So if I have I suspect to be a fake permanent residency card, we have to send an email to Passport Canada and then wait for them to respond. But that's not we're not going to get that back in 30 seconds. That could be a week. So a lot of times you don't have that. So we just try to work on what we can see and to find out if that is fake. Now, Ontario driver's license, I can check that through our computer systems to see if that's real or not, because I can actually see the photograph of the person. So that's how we can tell. But when we start to get into the passport and permanent residency card, those get a little more difficult. But there are ways to check it. Now, like Ray was talking about, these third-party places that are doing ID verifications. I know the one that I hear a lot about is Treefort, and I hear good things about it. But those are these third-party places that can look at these IDs, and they seem to be pretty successful. There's other ones like the bin readers and other things like that to can read the driver's license and the coding on the back of it. And I understand those are successful too, and they have those in the police cars. And even the fake ones may have something on it, but it doesn't match what's on the front of the driver's license.
So unfortunately, yes, there isn't a one size fits all check that you can do to run an ID and confirm that it is authentic. One resource that we do have that you might want to check out, it is a link in the program materials. It's on the additional materials page, I believe it's page 25. And it'll send you to LawPro's page showing examples of fake IDs, including some fake passports, international IDs, so that you can take a look at how authentic they do look like. Now, that isn't going to tell you whether another ID is fake or not, but it could give you something to familiarize yourself with what the lay of the land is and the situation out there. Another question, I want to throw this back to Ray again, because this has come up a couple of times, is there any advice with respect to when you get money into your account? How long should you wait, or what steps should you take to confirm, other than whether if you have a PCRN number that you can confirm with the bank? Obviously, you do know that it's good funds. But if you were just going to wait, how long does that generally take to know that that money is good money and isn't going to be reversed on you?
That's a difficult question to answer. The Payment Canada rules basically are fairly wide as to how long the banks are allowed to return money. Typically, it's done within a week or two. The best thing is to contact your bank, ask them what their standard is. If you have that relationship, and some law firms do have that with their bank, they can call the bank and the bank will verify for them the status of those funds and guarantee them, if you want, provide. LawPro has a endorsement that provides protection for overdraft when you have a counterfeit check or a bank draft. We basically recommend that you get bank confirmation, or if you don't, that you wait 8 banking days before you use the money. I know that lawyers roll their eyes every time I say it. Lawyers have, in Ontario, not everywhere, because in other provinces, lawyers will tell their clients that the banking system doesn't work instantly, and you have to wait and the money has to be confirmed. In Ontario, lawyers have taken that risk on, and I don't know why we do that, but lawyers have taken that risk onto their own shoulders to guarantee money that is not real money from time to time. So the best thing is to contact your bank and ask them to see what, the status of the money. The problem is banks won't answer the call or won't provide you with the information if you do ask, unfortunately. And so it is a difficult question to do. You should wait a few days at least to see how long, to see if the money is still there. Typically, the systems are much quicker these days to do the settlement. And so it can be a few days, but yeah, definitely you're looking at, I would think, good 5-6 days before banking days, before it's available. And as I say, our endorsement says 8 days. So to be on the safe side, that may be a good yardstick to use.
So another question in the chat, which I want to direct to Detective Holder, but I understand that there's almost certainly no clear answer to this question, but you might have some insight or thoughts on the matter that might be useful for all of us. And the question is just, why is there an increase in fraud at the moment? What is the source of this? Why are we hearing more about this, especially in the Greater Toronto area right now? Does the Toronto Police Service have any insights on that, and what is causing it?
I would guess money. Money would be always a big one, right? I think the one big spike that we're seeing here in Toronto is investment like in cryptocurrency. So that's probably the biggest one we see of these foreign investments in cryptocurrency, and that's made a big spike in the reporting of frauds here. And I guess there's been just some more news about it. The one with the person's house was sold on them, the title fraud, that was a major news report. So we've just been hearing a lot more about some of these things, but it's nothing more I can really think about why. Yeah, comes in cycles, I think.
Well, that's good. I think we're getting close to the wrap up here. I know that we've got a lot of questions. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get to all of them today. I leave it open to the rest of our speakers if they want to jump in with something that hasn't been covered or answering a specific question. Please feel free to interrupt me. But I think just to wrap up here, I wanted to again remind everyone that this program is eligible for 1.5 hours of professionalism, and it's also eligible for LawPro's risk management credit, which is a $50 credit on your premiums, and that can be accessed at lawpro.ca. This program will be available to view on a replay within the next week. It will be on the practicepro.ca/CPD website. And on that webpage, you can also, again, access these program materials. They are in the chat right now, but you can go to the webpage for this program and access them at any time in the future. We will send out a post via avoidaclaim.com, which is our blog that covers all ongoing frauds and alerts lawyers as to the facts of certain reoccurring frauds that are occurring within Ontario. And we will be putting a post there alerting people to when this program is available to view online. And you can subscribe to the Avoid a Claim blog to get updates on the ongoing posts and the ongoing articles and fraud information that we put there. Once again, I want to thank the staff of Toronto's Lawyers Association and LawPro for working behind the scenes to make this event run so smoothly. This program was brought to you by TLA along with Title Plus. Now, we talked a lot about insurance with respect to title insurance today. Title Plus does offer existing owner policies, which can be relevant for the kinds of imposter frauds that are ongoing for any clients who own a home, are concerned about imposter fraud, and don't have title insurance. They can acquire existing owner policies from Title Plus. If you want to learn more about Title Plus, you can go to titleplus.ca. Thank you again to Adkin, Ray, Ellie, and Nadia for speaking on the program and providing their insights and expertise. If you have any comments or if you would like to pass along any questions that we unfortunately didn't get to today, you can contact us at practicepro@lawpro.ca. That's practicepro@lawpro.ca. Thank you again, and I am going to put it back to Joan.
Thanks, everyone, for a very informative program. We're always happy to work with LawPro. I did want to ask that people take a minute to complete the survey that they'll receive tomorrow morning. It's an opportunity for you to tell us what worked about the program, what didn't, and if you have any ideas for other programs you'd like to hear. We'll be sharing that with Sean and his team so that, they know what kind of things people are interested in as well. Also, the TLA is a big supporter of the Lawyers Feed the Hungry program. So for every speaker at this program, we make a donation to the Lawyers Feed the Hungry program. It's our way of saying thank you for all the time and effort. We really appreciate it. And we hope to see you again on May the 25th at the Insurance 101 program. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.